Hi.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. And now we say continue, correct? All right. Okay, wonderful. So welcome. Thank you, everyone. We're going to start now, and like I had mentioned, we're doing it kind of performance style. So we're going to start in that way now. We're going to get into performance mode. So here we go. I celebrate teaching that enables transgressions, a movement against and beyond boundaries. It is that movement which makes education a practice of freedom. Bell Hooks, Teaching to Transgress, 1994.
We need to develop radical pedagogy. This is about strategy. This is about getting the work done. The Association of American Colleges and Universities, 2019.
The aim is to reframe issues through experience. Identity is an important part of us, but when you're speaking through experience, through emotion, you are putting everyone on the same plane. Paromita Vora, Agent of Ishq.
Art invites us to think rather than telling us what to think. This is one of its great powers, and if you make your art accessible and beautiful enough, people will follow where it goes. And because they themselves are deciding where to go with it, they'll more easily connect it to their own experience. What if the classroom worked like a nonviolent movement?
What if educators assumed resistance from students and worked to engage from an emotional place to encourage openness to new perspectives?
What if the class took a multidisciplinary approach, embracing theoretical, creative, and research-based perspective and practices?
What if students were invited to be the expert, asked to be storytellers, artists, or activists?
What if vulnerability and surprise were embraced, acknowledged, and studied?
This is what nonviolent movements do. Is this what classrooms can do too?
We'd like to share with you now a song called POC. And POC stands for, it's an acronym for Person of Color. And it's written and recorded by a student that we had in a class this past term. And the class uses the resist violence pedagogy. Be warned, there is some foul language that is used at the end of this song.
So sick of all this POC. I don't understand why they just can't see me for me. I know brothers who had it way worse than me, but we stand together when racism is all we ever see. Some of us just trying to find some peace, but others had enough, so they picking up the piece. Now they take it to the streets, they don't wanna hear us speak. So just let me tell my story, you can see just what I see. Now wait first, let me say, I don't gotta be religious if I got a certain name, but I'm proud of my name and I know from where it came. But I still been hated for it, and that hate just bring me pain. I was 7 years old when I was chilling on the beach in Florida. Got caught a terrorist and a foreigner. They was wishing me dead, somebody called a coroner. They kept slurring at me without a warrant. I didn't get it, I was 7, saying go to hell, cause I ain't wanted in heaven. I ain't never did nothing, they don't know where I'm from, but they assume based on the views that they were regulated. Now listen, on to the next. I was 14 when I got put under arrest. I was late for the bus, so I ran across the street. A cop told me to stop, so I didn't move my feet. He asked for ID, I didn't have it. He asked me for my name, I told him, he started laughing. He said, let me check the system, and he started to type. I wonder would this have happened if I was a little more white. Yeah, now let's move on. I've been all around the world, but the biases in some places just stay strong. So I don't stay long, cause in the airport they often check me twice and I just try and stay calm. Yeah, put me in a separate line. They check me twice, they about to do it third time. I used to ask why, so I guess I never learned. Now I look in the line, it's all Middle Easterns, and I guess I fit the description. My last name Muhammad, so I guess that's where I fit in. No flawless was the reason, I swear my hockey bleeding. I'm so fucking sick and tired of shit, I'm on my knees, God, I'm pleading. Yeah, what to do? I got like 10 more stories I could go and tell you, but I'm sitting here asking like, God, what's the point? I done been through so much, all I got is my voice. Now I don't know what to do. I keep trying to stand tall, but I might be through. But no matter what happens, I'ma get up. This shit just never ends, I swear I'm fucking fed up. I'm so sick of all this POC. I don't understand why they just can't see me for me. I know brothers who have had it way worse than me, but we stand together when racism is all we ever see. Some of us just trying to find some peace, but others had enough, so they picking up the piece. Now they take it to the streets, they don't wanna hear us speak. So just let me tell my story, you can see just what I see,
The incredible music that you just heard was written and recorded by Dawson student and Resist Violence alumni, Caden Cesar Mohammed. We'd like to thank him for allowing us to present his work alongside our presentation today. And we'd also like to thank you for joining us. We are attempting to make this interesting and creative by sharing multiple voices and stories that motivate a group of teachers and students in the Resist Violence community of practice at Dawson College in Montreal. Although the whole group could not be here today, myself, Kim Simard, I'm co-founder of the pedagogy and cinema communications teacher, and Pat Romano, the co-founder and humanities teacher, as well as Sue Elmsley, English teacher and published poet, and Annick Legault, psychology teacher and researcher. We will share our voices about a pedagogical approach to addressing complex social issues we strongly believe in. At the end of our presentation, I will briefly introduce the Resist Violence website and open up for a Q&A. At this moment, however, we would like to share with you a recounting of the tragic shooting that took place at Dawson College in 2006, and a teacher's commitment to herself and her students after it happened.
My experiences that semester have had a big impact on my teaching, shaped my commitment to this pedagogy, to finding ways, effective ways, to find connections across the myriad of us's and them's we build. We all build, and engage my students in actively resisting the ideas that justify violence against others. But I also learned one very particular lesson. The semester was difficult. So many of us had students who had been injured or knew someone who had been shot or were friends with Anastasia de Sousa, the young woman just beginning her college studies who had been killed, or with James Santos, the young man who had spoken with the gunman, begging him not to shoot her a second time, saying, "You don't need to be doing this. There are other ways. I can help you." Everyone was on edge. Any sudden loud noise made people jump. Rumors flew, including one about a black trench coat left outside the college with a note saying, "Dawson, it's not over." In this context, I was teaching a course on the issues of war and peace. It was going well. Students expressed that they were glad I was not avoiding the topic of the shooting. But a few weeks later, when I began to speak about how a person can become capable of taking another human life, how militaries turn recruits into soldiers ready for battle, my usually engaged students went silent. I vividly remember the moment. I looked at them like deer in the headlights, I thought. And I felt so irresponsible, so foolish. How could I have gone this far? After class, I hurried to talk to one of the trauma counselors we had on campus. His words have remained with me since. Yes, one of your students might be triggered by the material in the classroom, but if they are, then they would be triggered at some point. There are potential triggers everywhere. And if it happens while in school, there's support for them. And your class, what you're teaching, is so very, very important. You are helping your students to understand what happened, and understanding makes healing possible. Don't stop.
triggers everywhere. As I was lecturing in the developmental psychology course on corporal punishment, I spoke of the concept of habituation, getting used to stimuli in the environment, and how it can escalate the force needed to punish a child. I had in mind a slap on a child's hand for touching something they're not supposed to and getting harsher next time, but didn't mention it to the class. A student of mine spontaneously said, with his heart on his sleeve, "Miss, I never got used to being beaten in the shower by my mother, never." My heart sank. I knew then I had made a mistake of acting detached, maybe even careless. I apologized and talked to the whole class, but directly to him. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I do not wish to diminish your experience. You're right in saying that we do not get used to being abused."
Silence, anger, disengagement, denial, each a common psychological process that can be activated automatically when we are faced with something that challenges our existing ideas and values.
Cognitive dissonance. This happens to all of us. We either hold two conflicting attitudes or we are confronted with our behavior contradicting with our attitude. This situation creates extreme discomfort. Since discomfort is so unpleasant, we, all of us, are motivated to do anything to reduce it. We either change our behavior, change one of our cognitions, or add consonant cognitions. We will go to extreme lengths to reduce the discomfort: denial, distortion, and justification. Aronson, 1998, 2007. More modern research using functional magnetic resonance imagery allowed researchers to locate what parts of the brain are activated when we are in a state of cognitive dissonance. The striatum and other highly specific areas with the prefrontal cortex are either activated or shut down. Basically, when we are in a situation of dissonance, the areas responsible for planning, reasoning, decision-making are turned off, while the emotional circuit is shining bright when consonance is restored. Harmon Jones, 2010, Brisson et al., 2007. So this means we cannot think rationally when we are in denial or trying to justify our attitudes and behaviors while facing dissonance.
In states of denial, sociologist Stanley Cohen emphasizes denial, arguing interesting is not why do we shut out, but why do we ever not shut out? Cohen explores the human tendency to deny more fully in describing some of the different forms denial can take. For example, in regards to what exactly is being denied, this could imply the facts themselves, as in, climate change isn't happening. The full significance of what happened, as in, it wasn't rape. Or a dismissal or minimization of the psychological, political, or moral implications that should follow, as in, this all happened in the past, can't we just move on? The very persistence of denial reveals the difficulties of creating a classroom environment where students open up to new ideas, particularly when they connect to systems of privilege and disadvantage. In such a case, how productive is it to tell them they are wrong by repeating one more time the facts? Stop me, oh, stop me. Stop me if you think that you've heard this one before.
A teacher wants to bring up a social issue that has a multitude of complexities and censors themselves for fear that conflict will erupt. Or a past experience of a student hijacking the class about racism with harmful all lives matter rhetoric makes the topic taboo in the teacher's repertoire. A teacher is evaluated as being too political, controversial, and moves their practice and research away from a topic they are passionate about.
I was a young teacher going over the impact media has on culture in the context of an intro-level communications class. As we started a brief discussion to encourage participation, we talked about sports and the ads that reinforce unrealistic concepts of masculinity. All was seemingly going well. Students were interested. They were provoked in the way I had anticipated. Then I explicitly made the link to these kinds of messages with rape culture. A very disturbed young man at the back blurted out, "There's no such thing as rape culture, come on." The class went silent, and with time running out, I tried to wrap up the conversation by asking why this was something he felt strongly about. He responded by leaving the room. For the week that followed, I tried to find every piece of media that could prove how real rape culture was. There was the YouTube video gone viral at the time with the Halifax Frosh Week group chanting, "No means yes, yes means anal." One of many examples I was prepared to show the class to prove something that I had assumed most had already accepted. But he didn't show. He dropped or switched, or who knows, I don't know. But his fragility struck me, and his extreme reaction made me really scared, actually. So I started censoring myself in class. I skated around terms I thought might be too offensive. I tried to find ways to justify this approach, even though it was really something that did not suit me and was not particularly effective. Events in the college, community, and beyond kept prodding at me as though to defy me, to keep squelching my voice and my commitment to engagement in the classroom with the issues that affect us all. I learned a colleague had made the wrong move with a student when a student tried to make a sexual harassment claim. "You're a very attractive young lady," he said. "Thought you'd be used to those kinds of advances." And then there was this that was on the news and everyone was talking about. And then I was on the metro and I saw an ad. It wasn't exactly this ad, but it looked a lot like this, where there was a woman being compared to meat. You know what I'm talking about. So I decided to show this to my students. I decided to show something that might provoke a reaction with my students.
Oh my God, is this materially being presented in class right now?
Yes, I know about this campaign. Are we going to study this?
Panties.
Not more about consent. We did the stupid workshop. Why can't we just get over it?
This is so thong.
We'll continue with this later.
In our community of practice, we discussed ways to frame violence to promote psychological safety for all, such as by providing a wider historical and cultural perspective, whether in terms of pulling apart the language to reveal how the meaning of words change in time, place, and culture, or by looking at the deep historical roots of systems that continue to privilege some at the expense of others. We explore the value of drawing out interconnections between different forms of violence, shifting from the personal to safer academic discussions and vice versa, and using art and storytelling to bring in the element of surprise so that students' psychological defenses are not already in place, filtering out material that is too threatening. While we explore the harm inflicted by structural and cultural forms of violence in a resist violence classroom, we never assume who is privileged in our classroom and recognize that those most resistant to social justice issues, typically white heterosexual young men, are often themselves feeling overwhelmed by their insecurities, shaped by such experiences as early abuse, relentless bullying, or family poverty, and buttressed by harmful expectations about masculinity. Essentially, we asked ourselves whether, as Allison, a 3D animation teacher in our community of practice phrased it, would I become a more effective pedagogue if I made a greater effort to better understand why some students resist me? This was bringing everyone to what is perhaps most interesting, but also provocative about the resist violence pedagogy, specifically its foundation in the theory and practice of nonviolence. Nonviolent theorists call for us to maintain a distinction between an individual and their actions or ideas, acknowledge the possibility for all of us to change profoundly, and inspire us to see ourselves in the other. In other words, to look for the we rather than the us and them.
Finding these interconnections or keeping alive a shared common humanity in all situations proved to be more contentious than we had anticipated. Can we really say that a we exist within a system of injustice? Or does this move us into the dangerous place where the power differentials, the privileges accrued by some, the serious wrongs done to others are glossed over? At best, perhaps we should see those positions differently within unequal systems as potential allies. But given the relationships of power enveloping them, the collaborations themselves remain inherently unstable. This doesn't seem a solid basis for suggesting the necessary existence of a we. Allison expressed her misgivings about being asked to find the we in a classroom.
She explained, we is the pronoun I ask students to avoid, unless they're working as a team. The I demands positionality and the you a call to engagement. We makes me suspicious. When I hear or see the word, I worry about the elision of multiple points of view, the oversimplification of an argument, but really my distrust stems from experience encapsulated in an article called The Politics of We by Mariana Trevgovnik, which argues, the we as a rhetorical device either ignores or demonizes individuals or groups it excludes, while repressive politics of inclusion obliges members to deny parts of themselves.
This we, though, is really the divisive us, very far from the nonviolence ideal of a shared humanity. And as Allison's explorations went on, she eventually concluded,
we cannot assume that any we pre-exists, that we are in agreement and working towards the same end, or that a we that ignores internal differences can or should be protected. Yet collective action is essential to effect lasting change. To build a we from disparate parts is a challenging, painful, courageous, and perhaps unending process. Still, the only we's that attract me or that I consider possible are polyvocal, self-making, transformative, and transforming arrangements of diverse actors that respect, listen, challenge, and learn from one another. Those we's need to be cherished, nurtured, and open to expansion.
This idea brings us beautifully back to the nonviolent theorist view of the we. For those following in a tradition of Gandhi or Martin Luther King, the we exists. It is richer in an alliance forged by common goals, well, one founded on a deep faith that broken relationships can be repaired, that reconciliation between enemies is possible. Of course, it takes work. It will never be realized unless prejudice, indifference, fear, and hatred are eliminated. But it is a vision that is awakened, that if awakened, can inspire us to try.
I was teaching the poetic form known as the villanelle, a tightly structured 19-line poem with 2 repeating refrain lines. We had already considered the most famous examples and were considering some contemporary examples in preparation for an upcoming in-class essay students were to write. When I showed a villanelle called Larkspur by Rachel Rose and published in her collection, Giving My Body to Science, things heated up in the class. The poem's speaker recounts to a woman named Ellen, who the poem is dedicated to, what happened when Ellen was moving into her first apartment in Brooklyn. Ellen was attacked by a stranger, nearly choked and sexually assaulted. The poem's speaker says, the door was left ajar. He forced your legs apart. Ellen was left with finger marks on her throat. In our discussion of the dramatic situation of the poem, one student, a young woman, took issue when I said that Ellen was sexually assaulted. She put down her pen and spoke up. She was raped. Raped. She was raped. Suddenly, this was a discussion about more than a poem. The tension in the room was palpable. Perched on the edge of a table at the front of the classroom, I could feel my adrenaline kick up. What was at stake here? Did the student perceive in my use of the term sexual assault an effort to deny a victim's experience or sanitize what happened to her? I was definitely being challenged and with a degree of hostility. I don't know if I answered in the best way. I forgot to take a breath, could feel my heart pounding, and my brow was probably furrowed. I didn't disagree with the student. It is a poem about rape, but I first defended my use of the term sexual assault. Canada has a broad definition of sexual assault. The law says it includes all wanted sexual activity, such as unwanted sexual grabbing, kissing, and fondling, as well as rape. Then I pointed to the poem. He forced her legs apart. We can surmise what happened, I said, but it's all the poem says overtly. I might have and should have invited the student to make her case, or somebody else in the class to do that, point to other evidence in the poem to support her assertion. She could have pointed out that the poem speaker says to Ellen, the evidence was intact. Your family was called to the emergency ward, which suggests that Ellen might have undergone an evidentiary exam or rape kit. I sensed that approaching the poem sort of clinically, treating it analytically by focusing on evidence, might have been construed as a challenge to the victim. I feared giving this impression, not sure if I was capable in the moment of saying that this is precisely one of the things that Rachel Rose highlights in her poem, the problematic way that sexual assault survivors are treated after a crime for which there are statistically very few convictions. And how, despite collective efforts to deny or erase the trauma, it recurs for the survivor, like the refrains of the villanelle form itself. I tell students that the moments they snag on in a poem are the most significant. As Robert Frost said, the poem is nicked for meaning there. But it was near the end of the class, and we stopped before resolving our discussion. Though part of me wished to come back to it the next time, that was the day of the test. And after that, I felt like too much time had elapsed and it would just be awkward. Did I lose an opportunity to discuss what was really at stake in the students' resistance to my characterization of what happened? This was before the Me Too movement, but we could all feel the rising tide. Did I settle on a legalistic definition or defense? Reading poems is about considering the evidence in the poem, I thought, but how did the woman who asked the question and how did everyone else in the class feel about our exchange?
Well, we are all a work in progress.
In reconceptualizing complicity in the social justice classroom, Michelangelo Zimbailis argues that we need to stop treating complicity as a problem to be solved and start treating it as a fact of our civic life and learn to live with. He adds, this implies, for instance, that rather than structuring our lives in ways that focus on avoiding complicity altogether, we should recognize that this is an inevitable aspect of political life, and we are all already complicit in all kinds of ways to unjust acts.
Megan Bowler agrees, noting that education is not effective if it is combative and alienating, adding that if as educator we shatter someone's familiar and comfortable worldview, in compassion we need to replace the vacuum with something else. She goes further, suggesting that we need to offer our students a sense of critical hope. She quotes one of our angry, defensive white male students who told her at the end of the semester that he wished he had told the class that all these screwed up things in the world could possibly change.
Zimbailis expresses it this way. If the issue is how to handle white students' denial of complicity, the pedagogical question at hand is not what can I as a teacher do to reaffirm students' moral agency so that they admit their complicity, but rather how can I as a teacher move my students to take action in their everyday lives to refuse being complicit in social harm.
On Facebook, a former student of mine posted in despair, I can't take all this bad news. I want to just crawl up in a ball and try to forget about the state of the world. I replied, have you tried focusing on the resistance to all of these things? Photography and artwork can evoke our emotions and self-reflection. They can document and present change, as well as usher in possible alternatives. A young man in my class had an idea for a project on objectification. It was a commentary on the over-sexualization and commodification of women in rap music and culture. On the day of the pitch to the class, he waited until the very end to speak. He presented the idea of reappropriating album covers, replacing and the revealing images of women with men to make a point. Then sheepishly he said, I kind of feel bad presenting this idea because I'm white and I'm a guy, you know? What? No, erupted a voice from the room. It was the voice of a Black female student. She said, it can't just be me. We all have to fight this together.
All creative forms, especially those that speak to a collective, have the potential to inspire people to resist. Poet W.H. Auden famously wrote these lines, "For poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper. Flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs. Raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives, a way of happening, a mouth."
Since 1991, a poetry festival in Colombia has been transformative in a community that was plagued by violence. In Medellin, Colombia, different forms of art, such as murals, but especially poetry, has been a way of happening, a mouth to counter violence. In his article titled Medellin's Poems of Peace in The Guardian, Benjamin Ball writes about this surprising phenomenon. Medellin is the world capital of poetry. This is no small achievement. In 1991, Medellin, the capital of Colombia's mountainous coffee region, was the most violent city in the world and a global center for drug trafficking. Festival organizer Fernando Rendon told me that it was founded in the context of as a form of cultural resistance, a voice for peace and a protest against injustice and terrorism, including state terrorism. The festival is now the largest of its kind in the world. Over 8 days, free poetry recitals are held in public parks, university theaters, high security prisons and schools and libraries in poor, marginalized suburbs. To date, Medellin has hosted 820 poets from 142 countries and many indigenous nations. Colombia is still a volatile country, but Medellin is no longer a place where the majority live in fear.
People turn to art even under horrific conditions, searching for ways to express their humanity, oppose the status quo, motivate others, and inspire hope for a better future. But, of course, artistic forms of resistance are not sufficient in themselves to bring down systems of injustice. And in Colombia today, we are witnessing a resurgence in the population's anger over the unaddressed social and economic inequalities in society. Nonviolence has many tools in its toolkit. The value of storytelling and art is that it can open up new ways of thinking and being, creating the foundations for the groundwork of social change to take hold. And as such, it has immeasurable value for activists and educators.
Nonviolence theory and practice. Nonviolence is a strategy for social change. Nonviolence is a foundation for a pedagogy. The term nonviolence provokes many responses.
Nothing to think about here. I'm not violent.
What is there to talk about? Teaching is nonviolent.
I'm not advocating violence, but let's be realistic. Do you think that the powerful will just give up their privileges?
What is missing for many, perhaps most of us, is a real understanding of how transformative social change actually takes place, or much awareness really about the history of nonviolence. Susan Neiman's Learning from the Germans is an enlightening exploration of what peoples addressing the legacies of institutionalized systems of racism can learn from Germany's efforts to confront meaningfully their own. She examines the strengths but also weaknesses of Germany's approach, one being the failure to inspire the next generation with the possibilities for resistance, even to the Nazis. There are many monuments, street names, and schools throughout Germany that commemorate the Munich University students, Hans and Sophie Scholl, who were arrested and executed for printing and distributing anti-Nazi leaflets. These are in contrast to the single monument that stands in a little park on a side street, usually empty, that remembers the bravery and triumph of hundreds of non-Jewish wives who protested in February 1943 in Berlin, right next to the SS headquarters, the arrest and soon-to-be deportation of their Jewish husbands. They came every night after work for more than a week. They were heedless to the Gestapo guns that were brought out to confront them. And though mostly forgotten by history, they prevailed. Their efforts led to the release of their husbands by a regime worried about inciting larger societal opposition. Their story for Germans, in contrast to the Scholls, is more threatening. It challenges the widely held narrative that resistance to the Nazis was doomed to fail. In fact, its memory perhaps raises some uncomfortable questions for all of us, but at the end of the day, it also inspires us to think of new possibilities. Nonviolence, so often devalued and dismissed, has a transformative power that few of us recognize. To reclaim its power, nonviolence must be understood as including actions that are simultaneously without violence, but also against violence. Its capacity to be forceful, even coercive, yet restrained, to oppose unjust systems while respecting individuals, to be disruptive and at the same time constructive, creates the unexpected, spaces where real change becomes possible. As nonviolent activist and theorist Ellen Vinthagen argues, these dualities are most visible in actions that are not only without and against violence, but also beyond violence. And this is where art and activism can be so powerfully combined and brought into the classroom.
Stephen Ducombe and Steve Lambert from the Center for Artistic Activism acknowledge that the term artistic activism seems like an oxymoron, but like most paradoxes, it contains a deeper and more incisive truth. At first glance, these aims seem at odds with one another. Activism moves the material world, while art moves the heart, body, and soul. In fact, however, they are complementary. Social change doesn't just happen. It happens because people decide to make change. The ability of artistic activism to surprise us, to show up in unlikely places, for example, not a gallery, or take on unfamiliar forms, for example, not a protest march, creates an opportunity to bypass seemingly fixed political ideas and moral ideals and remap cognitive patterns. Surprise is a moment when hearts can be touched and minds reach and both changed.
Meanwhile, back in my classroom, in a class about media and rape culture, I showed what I showed you earlier, which is the hashtag "This is not consent" image again. And what's interesting is that in this context, I asked a few questions to students. And through that questioning, students' reflections on this campaign and the use of artistic activism allowed for there to be a conversation that allowed us to enter into the complex discussions about the difficult topic at hand, which was rape culture. And we all had a common starting point: this image, this art, this idea. Although everyone brought their own impressions, each person left with the understanding that this is a reaction to something profoundly biased in many cultures. They can research the campaign's motivations. They can discover the story of the defense attorney in Ireland using a woman's choice of panties as a justification for rape. They can research why so many sexual assaults are not reported. They can study the resistance to this thing we call rape culture without the conversation becoming polarized or hurtful. The unexpected has a way of puncturing our shells, if even for a short moment, and these surprises can lead to larger openings if they occur regularly. And if all goes well, students might want to develop a campaign of their own and respond creatively to what is being learned. In some cases, in my classroom, that has looked like this. And it's also looked like this.
Art can connect people. We know from a 2004 RAND study that, quote, the communicative nature of the arts, the personal nature of creative expression, and the trust associated with revealing one's creativity to others may make joint arts activities particularly conducive to forging social bonds and bridges across social divides. Using stories and art in the classroom offers safe spaces for silent contemplation and personal growth. Suddenly, a student who felt angry or powerless about a certain issue feels compelled to make work that will get people to think about it in a different way and possibly act towards a shared goal. There is strength in creating that thing, and even more in learning how to express one's truth in a space where others are taking the same risk. By engaging in this activity with our students, we explore agency, creativity, vision, and vulnerability as a team, admitting when things are not where we might want them to be.
This work, this shared vulnerability, takes practice. It has to become a habit. The use of the word habit is significant here. Sarah Ahmed, who in Living a Feminist Life asks us to create more equal relationship with one another, describes whiteness as a habit. And habit links to the latest research and prejudice studies. 30 years ago, psychologist Patricia Devine first defended the idea that people could be unconsciously racist. Skeptical of the significance of interventions that seek to directly change implicit or unintentional biases, as she refers to them now, Devine asks us to consider them as an unwanted habit, to be broken through a combination of motivation, awareness, and effort. We think this strategy offers further insights into the power of the resist violence pedagogy. As students' awareness of the suffering inflicted by violence in its many forms increases, they're also encouraged to pay attention to violence that shapes their lives, reflect on the possibility of change, and actively begin to find creative ways to resist violence. They are potentially developing an everyday habit of resistance.
This is what nonviolent movements do. This is what classrooms can do too. That the present driving force in today's activism is young people reminds us of the necessity of making more room for this kind of experience regularly in the classroom. The beauty of studying and engaging in artistic activism is that no one has to be an expert, but everyone finds connections with one another by trying.
You have a poem to offer.
It is made of action.
You must search for it.
Run outside and give your life to it.
Thank you so much for being with us. Here are the works, the text cited in our presentation. I'd like to, for you all to pay close attention to our website. I'm going to do a little tour of the website. But before we get there, before we get to that, I'm sure there are lots of burning questions, which is what we're so excited to get to. One of the things that we would like to do is we have a poll to see how perhaps this is pertinent to you, some of the topics that we've been talking about. And while you're answering the poll questions, thank you. Thanks for the virtual applause. I always like when students do that because I'm like, oh, you're with us. Okay. Thank you so much with the responses too. So while the poll is being given, what I'll do is I'll do a little tour and give you an example of what our website offers. It's by no means complete, but it is there and it is something that can be resourceful perhaps for you. And then when we come back, we have a few kind of like specific discussion, kind of workshop-y questions that we'd love to engage with you about. And of course, we'd like to answer any questions that you have. So I was wondering, Sebastien, if the poll could be sent out. Oh, there it is already.
Oh, wow.
Awesome. Thank you. Merci, Sebastien. And as you're doing this in your little screen, I will also share the screen of our website. So thanks so much for being in attendance here. Here we go, the website. Which of course is not here. Why is that? Oh yeah, because I went to Caden's project, my apologies. All right, so our website, if you have a chance to look at it right now as I'm sharing the screen, we have a wonderful homepage that exhibits some student work that has been done in classes that employ or use the resist violence pedagogy. So lots of student work on display here. There's also our kind of motivation, our goal, etc. There's an about page that will tell you more about kind of how this all came about. It came about through a collaboration between Pat and myself, and then there's the larger community of practice now that we hope to expand. So one of the things, if you want to hear Caden's rap song again, you can go to the exhibit. So we have some online exhibits of student work. This was this year's or this past term's. So we took the theme Justify, and we tried to work around that theme. So students have made amazing projects. I don't know how virtually, and with I don't know, I've been a bit tired with this whole like online learning thing, but students just really made some really excellent work. So I encourage you to look at all these. Some animations are in there, some interesting video projects, etc. We also have on our website, as I'm navigating through, just to give you a sense of it, we've got modules. So we've developed modules, and as you may have noticed, even through our presentation, that our approach is not necessarily to say, okay, we're just going to talk about rape culture today. I think, our approach is to find interconnections between ways in which people have been oppressed or people have been discriminated against, and that we're not necessarily saying that they're all the same, but we're trying to share through experiences. And so a lot of our modules are not necessarily specifically about racism or about sexism, etc. But there's kind of overlap. And the othering module, I think, is kind of a good example of this. So we give in our othering page, oftentimes, or on a module page, we'll often give a starting point. So where do you want to start with this? We often give, we kind of suggest that through critical thinking, media literacy, and creative expression, there can be ways in which you can delve into topics with a possibility of opening those minds that we're kind of hoping to open in ways that, that you can do that. So we kind of give different goals, or what we at first we're calling competencies. We're using very CEGEP language, which I think is what it is. But how can you kind of like develop these concepts? And we've got oftentimes a featured artist or someone that you might want to look into a little bit more. In this case, there's the poet by the name of Lorde, Audre Lorde. Here, so you can kind of look at her work, and I have a link to a poem that just blew my mind when I read it. And then we have some web-based resources for the classroom. Some are you can look at them and you can click on something that will allow you, but some we don't have the rights to. So they're copywritten or whatever. So we've kind of done a summary of them so that kind of what that can look like. So I hope that this is helpful in some way. We also have, if ever you're interested, our community practices work very, very hard on doing very much what we're doing today, like kind of these collaborative presentations of issues that we think are very important. So we've written a variety of different blogs. We've written about, like, Susan, Allison, and myself, we're all three in the arts field. So we've written about kind of what is critique in the classroom, and is it really, does it have to be that bad, So we write about ways in which it can actually create bonds in the classroom once you get into the art practice, even if you're not necessarily comfortable with it. We've also had great kind of critiques of certain ways in which, like what is, like asking the question, what is too much? And we all kind of weigh in on like, how far can you go with this? You don't want to devastate, but at the same time, you want to find a way to kind of, insert some kind of critical hope, as we heard Bowler emphasize, and we believe strongly in that as well. So there are many different ways in which we've kind of gone about expressing ourselves through writing related to the pedagogy. And if you want to, you could have a look at that as well. So that's our website. I encourage you to look at it. I'll put it in the chat. And now I'll leave it up to Pat or Nick, I forget who it was, who is going to do the question, the burning question of our discussion.
I've just posted up now. So, so basically we're asking, we thought a good way to start the conversation might be to think about those three, I think, central concepts: discomfort, psychological safety, and critical hope. And perhaps draw out some of your questions, thoughts on those concepts. Or at the same time, if you would like to share any of your difficult teaching moments, your concerns you might have had about teaching a topic that went too far, using a reading or something, a video that went too far, conversations that just suddenly devolved into angry exchanges between students, had students simply walk out, as Kim was talking about. So just very open to get us started.